If I could just have an indulgence to sort of hit the last point I've been working up to, I'll try to be very quick.
Yeah, although you could have skipped A, B, C, D, it's been testified to many times that it wasn't met, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Here's what they mean about relevance. Under the CSIS Act Section 2, there are 4 specific conditions that, if any are met, the government may invoke the Emergencies Act. The 4 subparagraphs are summarized as follows: espionage or sabotage, foreign influence, terrorism, or subversion. Again, these are summaries of the 4 conditions, which you can find publicly under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. If any of these 4 conditions are met, the Emergencies Act can be invoked. However, as you may have seen in Brendan Miller's opening remarks, he rightfully anticipated there would be no evidence given that satisfies any of the 4 conditions.
The Emergencies Act requires several things. One, it could be invoked due to espionage and sabotage. Are you going to hear any evidence about espionage and sabotage? The answer to that is no. 2, it could be invoked on the basis of clandestine or deceptive foreign influence, or foreign influence that involves the threat to a person. Are you going to hear evidence about that? The answer to that is no. It also could be invoked on the basis of threats or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. Are you going to hear evidence of violence against persons or property? The answer is no. Lastly, it can also be invoked if there is a group or persons trying to destroy or overthrow by violence the system of government of Canada. Are you going to hear evidence about individuals trying to do that? The answer is no. And the answer is that there was no reasonable and probable grounds to invoke the Emergencies Act, and that the government exceeded their jurisdiction, both constitutionally and legislatively, in doing so.
Sabotage associated with the protest, correct?
That's correct.
So the 2A definition wasn't met?
No.
Okay. And there was no foreign interference?
We have, I think it's in our testimony that we have said that we investigated foreign interference in relation to the event, including foreign funding, and we do not see these activities amounting to a threat to the security of Canada.
So 2B wasn't met?
Yeah.
Thank you. And there wasn't any serious violence associated with the protests?
I would not say that.
Or a credible threat of serious violence?
That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at, how these events or individuals, might engage in activities that meet our threshold. This is where I was answering questions earlier about, distinction between what law enforcement would be doing in terms of serious violence versus what we would do as a CSIS under the confine of the CSIS Act.
Okay, I'll be more specific then. There were no activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada, correct?
Yes, and we've testified to that earlier. I think.
So 2C wasn't
2C was not met.
Okay, and just quickly, there was no credible threat to overthrowing our established system of government.
I can say that we have not investigated under 2D.
Okay, thank you. So not only was there no Section 2 threat present, but there wasn't even reasonable grounds to suspect a Section 2 threat was present.
Well, we are on the record to say that we already had individuals who had met the 2C threshold. That were subject of investigation that were involved, and so we had legitimate grounds to be looking at what was happening. As we've said, based on our expertise, we have seen, unfortunately, events like that where individuals were radicalized and mobilized to violence extremely quickly. So that's why we continue to expend those resources throughout those events to make sure that we, again, did not miss something.
This was later confirmed by the Ontario Provincial Police Intelligence Chief Superintendent, who also verified, while under oath, none of the 4 conditions were ever met.
You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of espionage or in support of espionage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of sabotage or anything in support of sabotage.
That's correct.
You didn't see anything in the evidence, any evidence in the intelligence of any form of foreign influenced activities within or relating to Canada that involved the threat to any person.
I saw no information collected or intelligence produced to support that, no.
You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat of a use of acts of serious violence against persons for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada or a foreign state.
I'm aware of no intelligence that was produced that would support concern in that regard.
Thank you. You didn't see any evidence in the intelligence of activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat of use of acts of serious violence against property for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada or a foreign state.
Did we have any credible intelligence that that would occur? No.
Thank you.
You could have skipped A, B, C, D. It's been testified to many times that it wasn't met, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Would you agree with that?
There was no intelligence of
There was no credible
there was
intelligence.
no credible intelligence of a threat.
Yes.
That I would agree with that.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's fair to say that based on all OPP intelligence and the intelligence provided by the RCMP and federal intelligence agencies to the OPP, to your knowledge, there was no credible threat to the security of Canada as defined in Section 2 of the CSIS Act.
That would be my understanding, yes, as determined by Superintendent Pat Morris in consultation with CSIS and the RCMP.
Thank you.
Challenges to the use of the Act, I have decided to set out my own views on the invocation of the Act and the measures taken under it. After careful reflection, I have concluded that the very high threshold required for the invocation of the Act was met. You could have skipped A, B, C, D. It's been testified to many times that it wasn't met, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
As I do not consider the factual basis for it to be overwhelming. Reasonable and informed people could reach a different conclusion than the one I have arrived at. You could have skipped A, B, C, D. It's been testified to many times that it wasn't met, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
After careful reflection, I have concluded that the very high threshold required for the invocation of the Act was met.
I have a message for the Government of Canada. We're not stupid. We know what you did during the Public Order Emergency Commission. We know what you've been doing to us for the last 3 years. We're watching. We're listening. We know what you're doing. Stop treating us like we are stupid.
Severely restricted the rights to freedom of expression, assembly, and association. The Emergency Economic Measures Order chilled freedom of expression by deterring donations to organizations opposed to the public order emergency, such as the CCF. For the CCF, the fundamental question is whether the condition in the final clause of Section 3 of the Emergencies Act was met, that the Ottawa protests and border blockades could not be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada, federal, provincial, or municipal. This clause codifies the requirement that the Emergencies Act is a last resort, which can only be triggered when all other legal tools fall short. Third, although the Commission will necessarily focus on recent events, a sense of history should frame how it approaches this task. The Emergencies Act is a successor to the discredited War Measures Act, which was abused during the FLQ crisis in Quebec. The Emergencies Act, especially the Last Resort Clause, was drafted to ensure that the Act could never be used by a federal government against its political opponents. For 34 years, the Emergencies Act was never used. The public order emergency of 2022 was a historic first. But now that the glass has been broken on the Act, it can be used again. The Act was used by this government against individuals protesting vaccine mandates, but a future government of a different political stripe could use the Act in response to protests against pipelines or climate change. When the Commission asks hard questions about the Act's use in 2022, the Commission must also focus on the Act's potential misuse in the future and protect the right to protest, parliamentary democracy, and federalism. And what the Commission says matters not just to Canada, but globally, where the use of emergency powers is on the rise. The world will be watching our work.